Washington Post opinion writer, also an MSNBC contributor, and Emily Tisch Sussman, former vice president of campaigns for the Center for American Progress. Good to see both of you. Mr. Capehart, I'll start with you there in D.C. Let's start with this new poll out of Iowa right now. Very much appears to be anyone's game. For Mayor Pete, what we're seeing here, is it just a post-debate bump, or is there more to it than that?
It could be a post-debate bump. The debate was just last week. He did well, as he always does. But also, he's putting the infrastructure in place so that people in Iowa can get to know him and learn about him. And by infrastructure, I mean district offices and having people associated with his campaign on the ground there so that caucus voters can go and talk to a real person. And, he's been in Iowa a lot. So that could be, most likely is, a lot of what's driving his surge in support. And these state polls, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, are infinitely more important than the national polls. And so the fact that he's surging in a state poll, and the first or critical state poll, as opposed to the national polls where he's further down, is significant.
But here's the thing, Jonathan, as you know, yes, he's surging in Iowa, but if you look at Mayor Pete Buttigieg's polling with black and brown voters in places like South Carolina, Nevada, it's low single digits.
Yeah, and that has been will continue to be a problem for Mayor Pete. You cannot win the Democratic nomination for president without significant support from the African-American community. That's always been the case, but that is really going to be the case in 2020. And so as we get away from Iowa and New Hampshire and into states like Nevada, where the Latino vote is high, and South Carolina, as you know, Craig, where the African-American vote is as high as 60% of the electorate. And then Super Tuesday, where there are other high black electorate states, Super Tuesday is 3 days after South Carolina. So if Mayor Pete can't pick up African-American support, it's going to be, I have a hard time seeing how he actually crosses the finish line and get the nomination, since that is his goal.
Here's the other part of this poll that I found fascinating, Emily. Same poll among our voters who have a preferred candidate, 63% say that they might change their minds before the caucus. What does that say about the current field of contenders? What does that say about your average Democratic primary voter right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing that jumped out to me out of this poll is, yes, Mayor Pete went up, but really it's still a jump ball. Like, it's still pretty much anybody's game. Everyone who says the way these polls work is, they generally call and ask, who is your preferred candidate? So you give one name. But really, when you have conversations with caucus goers and voters, they're still evaluating the field. They're still keeping top three in mind. And this is why I think we're starting to see a lot of candidates spend more physical time in Iowa than we have been before. We're seeing announcements coming out from a lot of campaigns saying, hey, this is our strategy now. The candidate's going to stay in the state a lot. And part of that reason is that they're trying to go voter by voter, and they're trying to hit some of the other towns to pick up, some of the smaller towns to try to pick up a couple voters there. I mean, we saw Amy Klobuchar was in a town of, I think, 1,200 people over the weekend. First candidate to visit that town. So, people are open, and that's why the candidates are trying to get in and try to see as many voters as possible.
Meanwhile, the other big story coming out of all of this, according to Politico, the Trump money machine. It's got a lot of Democratic operatives quite concerned. It's, of course, this is the kind of money that allows him to find new small dollar donors and work to expand the electoral map. How do Democrats fight the Trump campaign's head start?
It is difficult, to be totally honest with you. I mean, it's like there's two campaigns happening at once. There's the Democratic primary, and then there's preparing for the general. I think this is something that a lot of people would like to see the DNC doing, to be able to fight back against Trump early on. And to some degree they are, because they are cultivating and planting local stories about local impacts that his policies have had. But this online thing is where it becomes very visible. Look, I've been speaking with online experts, social media experts, and direct-to-consumer experts about what does it really mean to have the early money. And basically what the Trump campaign is doing cannot be replaced later down the road, that if you start doing these large-scale digital ad buys and become smarter and just test content, constant testing content, you know so much more about your audience that even if you do a big money dump into digital in the last weeks and months, it cannot replicate what you've done early on.
Jonathan, Politico notes that the president has nearly twice as much cash on hand between his campaign account and the RNC as Barack Obama and the DNC had at this time in his re-election run. Apparently, and you probably know this better than I do, a lot of high-dollar Democratic donors, they're sitting out the primary fight. They're waiting to see who emerges. Is that a sound strategy at this point?
Well, I mean, if you're a donor, sure, hang in the background until there's a nominee and then flood that nominee with cash. Ideally, I think what high-dollar Democratic donors should be doing is figuring out what organization or entity can we put together, or is there an existing entity that we can flood cash into to try to do things to offset what the Republicans are doing. But Emily is absolutely right. You know, the Republican money machine is going to be tough to beat. And let's keep something else in mind, Craig. President Trump has not stopped running for president. Remember, after Election Day, he kept going. After Inauguration Day, he kept going. All those rallies that he's been doing for other candidates or just for himself since becoming president have all been about running for re-election in 2020. And then the other thing is, you know, he has a vested interest in staying in office for a lot of reasons, but a lot of his supporters have a vested interest in him staying in office. And this is the ultimate clash when we've had conversations about, you know, there are demographic shifts and shifts in the culture of the country. And there are a lot of people out there, whether we want to accept it or not, who will do anything and finance anything to ensure that the status quo, as it is right now, as we're talking, remains in place.
All right, Jonathan Capehart, thank you, Emily Tisch Sussman. Really quickly,
Thanks,
Emily, just really quickly, Emily, Joe Biden's campaign at this point. If you see those Iowa poll numbers come out, I mean, how concerned should they be at this juncture?
I think pretty concerned because it feels like the firewall that's been there. A lot of people have been throwing support and money behind Joe Biden because they feel like he's the only one that can really reach across the aisle to people who have been Obama-Trump voters.
And we also haven't talked about Joe Biden's cash on hand. I mean, you look at the third quarter fundraising numbers that came out last week. He's burned through a lot of money.
He's burned through a lot. He has a lot of consultants, to be honest with you, which burns through a lot of money. But his campaign has every reason to keep spending it and not hold that cash because they need to see him go back up in the numbers to keep that flow going.
Emily Tisch